Teachers at Dawn Mountain, and would like to welcome you to this new course and also reflect for a moment with you about the time in which, as it happens, we are beginning this new course, looking into our emotions. It was, of course, planned before COVID, before the devastating murder of George Floyd last week and all that has unraveled since then and been expressed since then. And we have always felt that looking into our emotions is just very important for life in general. It's important for when life goes well, and it's important when we hit eruptions, as we are in a kind of eruptive period right now. So I want to acknowledge that there may be heightened feelings of various kinds among us or in your families or in your neighborhoods. And that being so, also recognizing that, at least the way we look at it, and we've been talking about this quite a bit, we feel that the kind of spiritual work of being honest about how one feels, curious about how one feels, all the things that are going to be richly explored in this class are really very relevant to contemporary events. I mentioned the other day to some of you an impassioned speech that impacted me very deeply. Killer Mike, famous as a rap figure, but also an extremely eloquent public speaker, who spoke about what do we do at this time. He was speaking primarily, I think, to the community of protesters that are so active around the country. That maybe not everybody who is protesting is in the streets. And I felt what he said was very important. He said, this is not the time to burn down your own house. He said, this is the time to go home and reflect and plan and plot and discover what is most effective, most appropriate to do. Doesn't mean stay in your house all the time, but take time to see what is in your heart and what can be most positively put into action in the best way. And this seems really important. President Obama also recently put out a statement which in a way said something very similar. He said that it's not about burning things, it's about making our voices heard, letting it be known that we do not condone injustice, that we recognize that there has been a long history, too long ignored. So these are all very turbulent, provocative moments that we're facing, and we have feelings about them. And when we talk about going home, Killer Mike seemed to be saying to be in a house rather than on the streets, at least violently on the streets. But also we understand home to mean, we say home is where the heart is. And what is in our hearts are, in fact, our feelings, as will probably come up over the course. And as we know, when we feel things deeply, we feel them here, not in the physical heart, but here. We say, I'm heartbroken. We don't say I'm head broken, at least not in that kind of context. So this course, I feel we're very fortunate actually that we do have it at this time, given the extraordinary people who are leading it, and that we undertake this in a manner of aspiring that the kind of learning and introspection and growth that we anticipate as part of this course will indeed allow us to be a more profoundly effective in positive ways in our home, with our families, with our friends, with our neighbors, and in the wider circles to which we belong. In that sense, our spiritual inquiry is and the strength that we derive is really very relevant to what is going on right now. And in that spirit, before I take a moment to introduce our first teacher of the course, I would like to invite us all to join in. At Dawn Mountain, we start pretty much every session with this traditional aspiration, which goes back to actually before the days of Buddhism in India, and is simply an aspiration that all beings be happy. It's really what everyone wants. They be happy, free of suffering, even-minded, because that's conducive to happiness, and able to take joy in everyone's joy, and in that way to be free of corrosive competitiveness. So this is our aspiration, and we sing it together, and we invite you to join us. And I'm sorry, I don't sing very well, but spirit is what counts. May all beings always have happiness and its causes. May all beings always be free of pain and its causes. May all beings always be pain-free and live happily. May no beings ever cling to those near nor spurn those far. And when we say all beings, we mean all beings of every color, creed, political persuasion, those who agree with us and those who don't. We wish them well. Doesn't mean we agree with them, but we wish them well. And it takes a certain kind of inner fortitude to wish everyone well. And who better to invite us into this conversation tonight? Harvey Aronson, Namgyal Dorje, who with me, we are the co-founders and teachers of Dawn Mountain. And in addition to being a deeply trained teacher of Buddhism in the Indian and Tibetan traditions, we met in graduate school in Buddhist studies. So he is well studied in Buddhist texts and Buddhist practices. And also he is a psychotherapist in private practice. He has been for nearly 30 years in that practice and has really thought deeply about how to bring together the wisdom of East and West to address our emotional experience in life in the modern West, in this country where we find ourselves. He has written both about the kind of aspiration that we just sang, his first book, Love and Sympathy in what is it? Love and Sympathy in Theravada Buddhism, which has actually been reprinted many times. It's published in India. It's also available in this country. It's about love and compassion in the Buddhist tradition, especially the early Buddhist tradition. And perhaps most relevant for this course, really a wonderful book that puts the wisdom of Buddhism and contemporary psychotherapy in conversation with each other, showing how they are similar and different. His book, Buddhist Practice on Western Ground. And so I'm very happy to introduce your teacher, for one of your four wonderful teachers. We will introduce each of them as we go, and I think soon we'll have a brochure introducing all of them to you as well before our next class. So now I turn it over with delight to you, Harvey.
So thank you all for being here, and it's wonderful to see many old friends and also to meet some new people. We welcome you to this venture. The overall scheme of the evening will be as follows. I will start with a two-part meditation. One part of it will be mindfulness of the breathing, and one part of it will be a body scan meditation. And then I will talk for somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes. I'm not exactly sure how long it will take. And then we will have a 15-minute dyadic exercise, which we will explain. And then we will come back and we will discuss that a bit. And at a certain point, if there is time, which I hope, Dent, who at least on my screen is central.
It won't make any.
We can't tell where you are on
Every
any
screen
given
is
screen.
different. He's wearing a nice reddish
Nice red
maroon
shirt.
shirt.
He will be a respondent. I hope we have some time for him.
You could wave, Dent, for the people who can see you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And that will be the course of the evening. So fasten your seatbelts. And for the meditation, those of you who want to sit on the floor, you can sit on the floor. Those of you who sit on the seat, you can stay there. Most important, if you can, have a relatively straight but not stiff back. You can have your chin tucked in a little bit. That tends to elongate the spine. And with mindfulness of the breathing, there are many, many ways to do it. Let's say for tonight, just to keep it really simple, find some place where you can place your attention on the process of breathing and then settle into the experience of that process of breathing. So you're actually wanting to place your attention in the process of breathing where you're sensing it most clearly, and just allow yourself to be with that sense experience. Might feel a little bit different, may not be something you're used to. If you have thoughts coming and going, it is okay. You're not trying to stop your thoughts. If you get completely lost in your thoughts, very, very gently bring them back. You may start with just sensing the support you have, what you're sitting on, contact between your buttocks and whatever support you're sitting on. You may appreciate the support of your skeleton. But most of all, sense into the process of breathing. Place your attention on that process and then rest in that process of experiencing your breathing. We are really oriented towards the experience of the sense and sensations of breathing. You can have your eyes closed, or if you have them open, try to have them not focused, very soft focus. What is the experience of the sense of breathing? It can be in your stomach, a little bit higher, your throat, your nose, your upper lip, nostrils. Now, place your attention on the sole of your right foot and just begin to gently appreciate whatever sense you have of your experience of your right foot, experience of the contact with the floor. You have toes, you have the front part of your foot, the middle part of your foot, you have the heel. Just allow yourself to sense what is the experience of your foot like. Maybe clear, maybe warm, maybe cool. Maybe you don't even experience your foot. You can just be an acknowledgement that that is not clear to you now. And whatever the experience is, can you be open to it? Can you be curious about it? Can you be tender about it? Patient with it? Just let it impress your experience and take it in and allow that awareness to start moving up into your ankle. And you just sense your ankle. And then you let that kind of sensing experience move up into your calf and your shin. It may feel like a bit of a current or a bit of warmth or fluidity or wind, whatever it may be, or hardness or softness. It may feel numb. It may not be apparent. Can we appreciate whatever our experience is and just let it be and keep that sensing moving up into the knee area, and then into the thigh area, the area where you're sitting, the upper thigh, lower thigh, the inner and outer thighs. There may be some areas which are stronger sensing than others. It's all right. Maybe you have no clarity of sensation at all. It's information. Can we just allow our attention to touch these areas and see what occurs? Similarly, moving into our right hand. We have our fingers and our palm and the top of the hand into the wrist, forearm, upper arm. Just sensing the whole arm area. Some areas may be clearer, some areas may be less clear. Very gently, very accepting, just curious and tender, welcoming into the shoulder, right shoulder, to the neck area. And from the right shoulder, we can sense a little bit down the upper back area and the front part of our chest on the right side. And then moving across our torso, the upper back and the back. And then the whole area that we would call kind of the emotional heart area, center of our chest. We just feel whatever is there. Could be light, it could be tender, it could be loving, could be contraction, could be unclear. Upper part of our upper back, upper part of our chest, into the center part of our chest, center part of our upper back, moving right along the upper left shoulder area, upper left part of the back, and the upper left part of torso. Sensing then into the upper left arm. What does it feel like? Warmth, cool, fluid, solid, vacuous, unclear, clear. And a kind of appreciative curiosity. To the elbow, forearm, and wrist, and palm, and hand. Just sense the forearm and wrist and hand area. Might be warm, might be tingling, might be unclear, might be clear. Might feel heavy, might feel contraction. Then the left buttock area, top of the left thigh, left outer thigh, left inner thigh, into the knee, calf and shin. And to the left ankle, heel and sole and front part of the left foot. And very, very gently, but with a light touch, we can feel into both feet, both ankles, both calves and shins, both knees, upper thighs, if you like, into the buttock area, into kind of the lower pelvic area. Just sensing the hands, wrists and forearms, elbows and upper arms, shoulders, upper back, upper chest, and just come to rest in the emotional heart center area. Maybe a clear sense of that area, and maybe very unclear, maybe spacious, maybe contracted. Maybe you feel some Teflon, maybe you feel nothing. Maybe you feel some depth, maybe you feel some mystery. What is your actual experience if you just touch into your heart area? And then slowly just sort of take in your experience, let it be settled. You're in some ways in touch with your embodied physical experience. And you can come back to the room that you're sitting in. So Anne very adequately, I think, expressed our deep, heartfelt concern for what is going on in our country at this time. Just before coming on airtime, I happened to read a very nice piece in Unfettered Mind. It is a blog by Ken McLeod, Unfettered Mind. You can find that by doing a Google search. There is a very, very thoughtful piece on being in this current, very, very difficult situation that our country finds itself in. That being said, does anyone have any observations, questions, or reflections they want to bring forward with respect to what I did by way of mindfulness of the breath and a body scan? You get to let me know that you want to speak by going to participants and clicking on raise hands. If someone wishes to say something, make an observation, how that went for you. Difficult, hard, not soothing, soothing.
Maybe especially if we haven't met you yet, and
Yeah.
get a sense of how this is for you.
You go to participants and you click on the raise hand. Greg, please.
It was quite relaxing, gave me a chance to quiet my brain down.
Uh-huh. Very interesting. Was that in the mindfulness of the breathing or in the scanning part?
By the time I finished the whole scan, I was very calm.
Okay.
It probably started towards the end of the breathing.
Nice. So one of the things that can occur, but doesn't always necessarily occur, is with whether it be mindfulness of breathing or a body scan, there can be calming. And thank you for letting us know that. I appreciate that. Nice to meet you. Thank you. I would take one more observation if someone wishes to share something. You go to participants and raise hand. I will count down 5.
Or if we haven't heard from you for
4,
a while.
3, and David.
Yes, as I was doing the meditation, I had a lot of back pain. It's okay. It's going to be fine. It's just sort of muscle. Anyway, so I ended up on the floor on my back, and I kind of congratulated myself for making that move because it totally relaxed me and the pain mostly went away. And I just thought, do what you need to do because it wasn't working before. And so there you go.
Excellent. And it speaks to, in terms of anything we do, I want everybody to be checking in with themselves as to how it's working. And if you need to make modifications that work for you, please feel free. You know, in general, people counsel not to practice meditation lying on the floor, but there are many situations where that may be the optimal situation for us to meditate. And so good for you. Thank you. Thank you. I will then move on with what I've planned to say. We're starting with the title, Appreciating Emotions in Spiritual Life. So the first word is emotions, or the first word I'll start with is emotions. And what kinds of emotions am I talking about? Love, anger, excitement, fear, shame, joy, disgust, but it could be any emotion that we feel. And I'll say it now. I wrote I think it's a 30-slide PowerPoint lecture for delivering tonight. And it is a wonderful resource. And it is on our class homepage. Emily, am I speaking correctly?
Yes.
So there's a homepage for this class, and that PowerPoint is there. And it's got a lot of references and a lot of material, both from the Buddhist tradition and from the psychological tradition. And if you really want to dig your teeth into this topic, I recommend it highly. So I did that whole PowerPoint, and then I thought about this whole thing once again, and then I wrote a whole other lecture for some reason. So the PowerPoint, you get 2 lectures for the price of one. With the PowerPoint, you get one, and what I'm going to do tonight is yet another.
The price.
So in terms of love, anger, excitement, fear, shame, joy, disgust, and all the whole gamut of our emotions, most of us tend to fall into 2 major categories, which I would call the under-emoted and the over-emoted. And sometimes we oscillate between both. So what happens when we're under-emoted? We can feel that life is dull and neutral, without motivation or color. We may feel life is driven by responsibility. We can feel disconnected from ourselves or others. We may feel isolated. One way we talk about this in therapy is we may act in. So all of our emotional energy kind of goes inside of our body. So we might be perfectionists. We might be workaholics. We might be depressed. We might be swimming in self-criticism. We may be prone to obsessive rumination. And by the way, I have all the things that I will talk about to some extent or another, or historically. You know, it's not that I am separate from any of this. I think most of us flow through a whole medley of over-emoting and under-emoting. But what does over-emoting look like? This is where we lose impulse control. We act out our emotions. We not only feel anger, but we spill shame and blame on those we're talking with. May actually get into fights, hit our partners, or hit our children, or hit our pets, hit our coworkers. We may not only feel sexual excitement, we may be inappropriate with our sexual excitement. We may not only feel drawn to exciting things, we may find that we become addicted to exciting things. So over-emoted tends to mean that we're acting out our emotions. We can't contain ourselves. We're just brimming with, let's say, anxiety. And, you know, maybe in order to tame the anxiety, then we drink or we take terribly dulling pills. But it's like, it feels like too much. With acting in, it tends to feel like too little, except with obsessive rumination, which will generally feel really, really like too much. And self-criticism usually feels like too much, and depression might. But acting out, it's like you kind of take the air out of the room if you're acting out. It's kind of obvious. So what is appreciation? We want to bring a kind of curious, tender, fresh take to our experience. Our emotional patterns, whether they're under-emoting or over-emoting, tend to be triggered by something, some repetitive pattern that had its root in our childhood. It's just, you know, I will confess that for the first 5 to 8 years of my therapeutic career, I actually fought that view rather stringently. And I was even training with some of the aficionados of family therapy who really, really did not like a historical view of emotional life. These were the strategic family therapists at a place called the Mental Research Institute in Menlo Park. And they hated anything that even smelled vaguely of psychoanalysis or a historic view of how we were formed. And it had some good points. A lot of the people who were quite active in that particular form of therapy were characters. But over time, just working with people, I have, and myself, I've come to see more and more how significant history is in forming some of the patterns that play themselves out in both under emoting and over emoting. We get stuck in what some people call an invariant representation. So if I had a powerful, maybe let's say attacking father, when I meet males, I might feel that they're about to attack and be very, very energetic. Maybe I had a kind of distant mother who was not available. And so when I relate to females, I'm wondering, are they going to be distant and unavailable? These things, if we really start getting honest with ourselves and our experience, they start becoming rather evident. And it's wonderful if we can bring some curiosity to our own experience and our own emotional patterns. In the Buddhist context, we have a view of an inner heritage of something called Buddha nature that we can eventually bring forward. From our Buddha nature can come things like curiosity, aliveness, love, and discrimination. These are kind of tendrils of our Buddha nature that can permeate our daily experience and contribute to what I'll call for the moment our sacred mind or our sacred experience. So for me, understanding emotion has involved coming to bring my sacred mind into the arena of being with my emotions and coming to appreciate that sometimes I may under emote or over emote. And I have an innate capacity to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. This is not something that occurs with an ordinary chit-chat existence in mind, but it stirs from something much deeper, dare I say something holy, which brings us to the next phase of the title, which is spiritual life. We've dealt with appreciation and emotion. Let's talk about spiritual life. What do we mean by that? And in the Buddhist context, a spiritual life might be someone who is following Buddhist guidelines, principles, and vision. But you don't need to be doing that to benefit from what we're talking about here tonight. Spiritual life is that life which has some orientation to something higher, higher values, or a higher reality. Many of us are familiar with AA, where there is a higher power, and that is one approach to spirituality. But really here we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. And so certainly you can come to this talk tonight from within any religious or spiritual tradition. Whether during the exercises or during the talk, during the takeaway, my fervent hope is that you can begin to touch into your own experience. And through that process of touching into your experience, you can even for a moment break out of your invariant representations and have a sacred moment, perhaps tinged by some aspects of wonder and aliveness, somehow that somehow reflects something deeper or higher for you and beckons you to continue your own journey to greater depth and greater heights. So the emphasis that I'm bringing forward here tonight is on experience, and is particularly on fresh experience. Most of us live in kind of cognitive repetitive experience, and we're not even aware that we're doing that. Slowing down and doing something like mindfulness of the breath, or doing a sensing exercise like sensing our bodies, can begin to bring us into a much closer to immediate experience level of being in the world than we normally allow ourselves. And it's within that fresh encounter with our lived experience that spirituality is ultimately going to play itself out with respect to our emotions. In terms of spirituality, we could say that there is something we might call a top-down kind of spirituality, which is you get an instruction and you follow that instruction. And a lot of what we do at Dawn Mountain is certainly that kind of spirituality. We have all sorts of instructions, even observe your breathing or sense what's going on in your legs and your arms, your heart. That's a kind of top-down instruction. It's addressing your mind, but you are needing to then approach experience, ideally, if you're really trying to live that instruction from the bottom up. You're trying to sense into your foot, into your ankle, into your heart. You're trying to sense what is the experience of breathing in its very nature of experience. That is something different. Sometimes I'll be living my life and I can remember it was just a clear instance for me. I was at a meeting and I often am a little bit kind of shy of groups or social interaction. And it was dinner time and I was sitting upstairs and I was alone and I was sitting and thinking, oh, it's dinner time. I don't like being with people. And that is a kind of thought I have about myself, a kind of invariant representation of who I am. We have all sorts of invariant representations about who we are. But I was kind of challenged in the context, and I was like, well, is that actually true? And I just sort of touched into my own experience, and it was like, no, I want to be with people. I want to enjoy the company of people. I want to meet people. I actually felt like I wanted to be with people. But there was this story that I had of myself that was a kind of invariant representation. And it wasn't allowing me to feel the immediacy of what really was operative in my experience. And I can only, in the space of a short evening and 120 minutes, encourage everyone to really a stance of curiosity and freshness and acceptance with respect to our experience. It's an ongoing challenge insofar as our ordinary chit-chat mind really wishes to encapsulate us in staleness. It's very, very challenging in our modern lives not to get drawn into stale perspectives, into partisan perspectives, into categorical experiences that take away from just experiencing someone in the fullness of who they may be. You know, do I approach you and say, oh, you're from Houston, and then I know everything about you? You know, if we think about that, what a ridiculous position that would be. But how much of our lives do we do things like that? You're a male, you're a female, you're a homosexual, you're heterosexual, you're an African American, you're white, you're Puerto Rican, you're Hispanic, you're from the North, you're from the South, you're from Russia, you're from China. There are industries dedicated to making money around these categories. The industry that I would like us all to support is the industry of, I am going to be in the immediacy of my experience. And when I'm sitting with you, I hope I could, and I'm getting chills just saying this is the first moment of my life with you. Can I relax all of those invariant representations and be really, really curious and watch the flutter of your eyebrow and your eyelash and your eyelid. And when you talk about something, see a quiver in your mouth and recognize that there's something alive in what you're describing. And can I say something like, well, when you said something about that movie, I saw some kind of movement in your mouth. What was that about? I'm really curious. And all of a sudden we're alive and we're in a real conversation, as opposed to, I saw another mystery last night. It stank. Oh yeah, I hate mysteries. And we're both bored and we're both tired and we're both not alive. And so when we can bring appreciation and curiosity and tenderness and sensitivity and acuity to our experience, the ordinary can be transformed into the extraordinary. It's in no way going to be possible for me to deliver on this in 120 minutes, but I do wish to pique your curiosity. And we're going to do 2 exercises. And I'm running a little bit ahead, so we might have some good time to actually talk with one another. I do want to just identify what we did at the beginning. We did a mindfulness of the breathing exercise, and that's really training our attention to rest in the process of breathing. It is the case that we are able to actually be with, let's say, our emotions and ultimately name them. It allows us to have both an appreciation of our experience and greater autonomy with respect to our experience. Sensing is really an amazingly powerful practice. Our emotions are very, very complicated events. They have something of a physiological component. They typically have something of a cognitive component. And they also usually have some orientation to action. In our culture, both in my own experience and with people that I work with, the inclination is to feel that emotions are so oriented towards action that the emotion is either acted out, or there's so much fear about the emotion being acted out that it's acted in. So instead of allowing myself to feel, let's say, a sexual feeling and just feel a sexual feeling, I am either I have a sexual feeling and I immediately am inappropriate, not good, or, oh my God, when I was a young man, I'd have these sexual feelings and they were kind of unruly, and maybe I even have some memories of things I'm not so happy about. So I don't have any sexual feelings. Just act them in. Shut it all down. Even when I get a little charge. But what would it be like to just recognize this is energy? There is a kind of energy that I feel. It can be sexuality. It can be joy. It can be fear. It can be shame. I'm actually feeling shame. And instead of drowning shame with alcohol or drowning it with poker or drowning it with TV, man, this feeling of shame, this is awful. I actually feel what shame feels like. And I can be with it. And I can actually sense it. Now, with sensing our emotions and being with them, it's a whole other world of being. It's neither acting out nor acting in, it's acknowledging. And it's also the case that it's sometimes extraordinarily powerful to eventually put a word on an emotion. It turns out that that is the case. There's a great quote that I came across just 3 days ago. This is a woman, right? Her name is Sarah Hapola. She's writing The Gospel of Brene in Texas Monthly. She's writing about Brene Brown. And the author herself says, learning to name your demons can keep those suckers from sneaking in the window at night. A lot of times we have feelings that are kind of embedded in our bones. We don't even know that we have them. We may hate ourselves. This is very, very common. And for many years, this was certainly something I worked with. We may hate ourselves and be so self-critical of ourselves, we don't even know that we're being self-critical of ourselves. And eventually, maybe through maturation or process of therapy, there are many ways that people come to this. We may realize, oh, I'm actually telling myself I'm a jerk. And the words are there. You hear yourself, I'm a jerk. Now, it actually turns out when we get that verbalization out of the bones, we've got a lot more to work with than when it is in the bones. There are people who go through life like this. I mean, it's so in the bones, it actually affects their musculature. And what's this about? Well, maybe we get into a really over the year, decades worth of therapy, and it's like, oh, my father always hit me when I said something, and I always had to flinch. Oh, that's so in the bones. And, you know, people don't even remember this stuff. Literally, it's forgotten. It's in denial. There's enormous processes of denial that we go into in our culture. About everything. People in swimming pools who are crowding during this COVID, they're just in denial. We could debate whether this is healthy denial or not, but some of them get sick and some of them infect dozens of other people. And then some of them have deep remorse and regret. For a while, they were in denial. There are places for denial. Sometimes we need to suck it up. Sometimes we need to sort of not be overwhelmed by things. I remember in social work school, and one of the students was going into a hospital for a social work job, and the teacher was saying, and she was saying, I'm nervous. And she said, the teacher was saying, deny, deny, deny. There's a place for this. But if you're going through life and somebody is always stepping on your toe and your toe is broken, and then you come into therapy and you say, gosh, you know, somebody's always stepping on my toe and I've got 10 of them and about 9 of them are broken. I don't know, you know, I want to talk to you about that 10th toe, whether I can do something. And I say, do you happen to notice that people are stepping on your toe? And it's like, no, I mean, I don't really feel anything. Do you think that's okay? Well, yeah, I mean, that's the way the world is. I mean, just people step on your toes. World, we've got a lot of work to do because that's denial. That's denial of your human respect of what you deserve, which is good care. It's denial of pain. We all do this in some respects or another. Without going into a whole bunch of history of my life, that's how I got interested in therapy. I was in so much denial that everything was great in the life that I was living. And then I started having panic attacks, and it was related to the fact that I wasn't acknowledging anything affecting me. So it turns out there are many, many ways to come to be with our emotions, come to appreciate the sacredness of our emotions. But actually, one of the simplest, down and dirty, cheap and handy ways to do this is to be aware of our sensations, to be aware of what's going on in our bodies. Emotions have physiological correlates. Now, some of them are actually scientifically categorized, and there are debates about this, are interesting debates. And Paul Ekman is a person who studies facial expressions and emotional expression around the world. It's a very, very interesting field. So maybe there are, facial expressions that are deeply correlated with our emotions. And there may also be physiological sensations that are quite correlated with our emotions. That may be the case. And it's also the case that we may be idiosyncratic, we may be outliers, and it also may be that our emotions are complicated. But typically, when we have an emotion, we also have a sensation. And one of the ways that we can become aware of our emotions is by becoming aware of our sensations. And in that process, instead of acting out or acting in, we can let the emotion be. And in letting it be, if we actually have some acuity to our experience, there can be some very, very natural freshness, wonder, curiosity, awe, and mystery in the very process of feeling our emotion. There can be a sacred experience of both the knowing and the known, and maybe even to the point of not really feeling those two are separated. But that comes with being with ourselves and being with our experience. The more we get used to allowing our experience to be and to let ourselves experience it, the more we will allow a certain kind of flow that has profound layers to it that affect both the quality of our knowing and that which is known, to the point where we may feel something very, very tender, special, and touched in some sacred manner that may not really be easy to describe, is part of our experience. And that may take time, it may take a lot of time, but it is part of our human heritage. So having said all that, I'm going to introduce the exercise. So the first part has to do with sensing. The other part of the exercise has to do with naming our sensations in relationship. So the sensing part really is grounded deeply in Buddhist practice, very, very emergent from mindfulness tradition. The second part is a little bit more grounded in modern emotional science, which is we are taking that experience of being able to be with our experience in a very tender, intimate, immediate manner, and we're naming the experience. Doing this with another can contribute to, I'm just going to call it for the moment, a sense of functioning personhood in the world. There are developmental reasons for doing this, and it has to do with naming our emotions allows us to have some space to be with and work with our emotions. Now, interestingly enough, there is a sweet spot in this, and then there's a whole bunch of stale spots. The sweet spot is when you're really freshly in tune with an emotion and you're kind of struggling to find a word, and then you do find the word. There may even feel like there's a kind of just a kind of, yes. And for those of you who are interested, I didn't put this in my PowerPoint, but Ann Weiser Cornell has a book on focusing, an introductory book on focusing, where she talks about this whole process of naming inner experiences, which is very, very profound, simple, profound, and transformative. And this is speaking to the fresh application of words to images and sense experiences and emotional experiences when we are trying to understand ourselves and communicate with another, and we are playing with what is the word that really matches this. That's the word. And then I convey it to someone. It's a golden moment of communication and relationship and relating. It's, if you like, compassion and love in action. It's intimacy in action. It's engaged reality in action. It is sacred space. What is the stale, rotten part of all of this is that we take that word and then we repeat it 1,000 times and we tell the same story 1,000 times. And the 1,000th time we're telling the tale, the word is dead, our experience is dead, and we're lost in some sort of concept. And same old, did I tell you the time that I was terrified out of my life on the top of the roller coaster? And I'm not feeling anything. You're certainly not feeling anything. And it's not conveying anything. And part of what can, again, be very, very rich is when we get ourselves back to that moment of authentic experience and that whole endeavor to match a word to our felt experience, that inchoate felt experience. There's something so exciting and so unknown and so mysterious about the action of that naming. Perhaps not an accident that the first chapter of Genesis is all about God's naming things. I mean, it's so interesting. Why bother put a whole good section of, the first book of the Bible about naming? Because there's something sacred in that process when it's initiatory and it's alive and you're actually in a relationship with someone and you're struggling and you're searching and you actually get it. You actually, if you're quiet enough and you're clear enough, you can just sort of be in that moment and it's like, aha. And really, really Eugene Gendlin, and then Ann Weiser Cornell writing that introductory book on focusing capture that so well. But that kind of presence, can take you from ordinary life to Buddhahood if you can cultivate it. Certainly that presence of knowing what your experience is directly, a kind of mindfulness. The naming is kind of an additional piece. In terms of Buddhahood, you may not need to know that skill of naming, but it's certainly useful in relationships and being in the world. Very, very significant for being in relationship and being in the world. And it's a way of including the sacred in our emotional life, engaging with others. So I just want to give everybody a little taste of this. in a very, very basic exercise, which we're going to, Emily, is that going to be in the chat, or are you going to put it up on the?
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, but I'm going to read it to you first so you have a real understanding. So we're going to break everybody up into breakout rooms automatically, and there may be one group that will be in a group of 3, and I'll address that at the end of the exercise. So see if you can do this exercise without preconception, with gentleness and curiosity as to what you think will occur, but rather as a fresh encounter with an experience. We're not doing an exercise that will require vulnerable sharing of personal emotions or history, but whatever you do discuss needs to be held confidentially. You can talk about your own experience when we regather in public, but not your partner's. So the first person is going to ask your partner to freshly sense into some prominent sensation they are currently feeling. It can be contact with the chair, feeling feet on the ground. It can be tightness or looseness in the face, or just sensing their breath. And the respondent is just going to sit with their experience for a minute or a minute and a half, just being with that experience and sensing it. Just what is it like to have some prominent sensing experience? See if you can get as close and immediate, in a way nonverbal to it, at least to begin with. So then after that minute or minute and a half, the first person asks the second person to put some words on that sensation and ask for 2 minutes to sort of go back and forth between sensing it and just seeing what words they can put on the experience, to struggle with it in a way. See what words really match. What's the process like of putting words on the experience? And in the final minute, the first person is going to ask the respondent to describe the difference in their experience as a whole between silent sensing and describing or attempting to describe. And then shift to the second person and do it all over again for a total of 5 minutes, and then take 5 minutes to talk with one another as to what it was like to sense first internally and then sense trying to give a name to the experience. Is that clear? Or are there any questions about the instructions? If there's a group of 3, do it, each one of you do it for, a minute and a half, and then 2 minutes, and then just debrief together for 6 minutes. Don't do the last minute of sharing. I hope that's clear. Any questions, or Emily's going to break everybody up by computer. If you are, so we're going to take 15 minutes. If you're in a dyad at home, why don't you just exit the meeting and come back at 8:30? That's going to be the easiest thing to do. Just exit the meeting. If you're a dyad at home, come back at 8:30, but leave now so that Emily, in setting up the dyads, won't see you. So all of you who are dyads, exeunt. Thank you so much. And then Emily will set up the dyads. Okay, we're there. Emily, it's yours.
You think people are clear?
Are there any questions?
Should we model it?
No, I think it's
Okay.
clear.
Okay.
Charlie Buck, what's the question? Charlie?
Yes. After we sit with it for 1 minute and then we go back and forth with describing and experiencing it, what was the next period? What do we do then?
The questioner asks the respondent, how was it? What's the difference between those two?
Thank you.
And you will find, if you get into doubt, you will find it on the chat. Emily has put it there for you.
Oh, that's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else with a question? Okay, good luck. We'll be back in 15 minutes, probably about 8:30 or 8:32.
32.
Bye-bye. Emily will set up the dyads. We're not going to join a breakout room, so we'll tell the people. Well, we could do it. We should have left, but we couldn't leave the meeting. Let's see who we get. Let's see who's in group. Oh, she's putting me in. Okay. I'm breakout room with myself. I'm on fire.
Can we still be heard? I think it was great. I mean, you kind of gave away your whole other course with PowerPoint. Aren't you going to do a course on that or something? Yeah, yeah. It made me wonder if I should read that book on focus. You have it? The second one is material. No. The first one. I'll be curious how they'll do it. I think some of that will be.
Elizabeth, Glass, or Dora, if you would join your breakout room, you have a partner waiting. Oh, no worry, Dora.
can't see the numbers so well. But I think it was 52. You want me to? All right.
You know how to, you know how to move it? The Zoom? Once it comes up, you just hit the arrow on the side.
This is the computer I used to look at it.
It's my, yeah, yes.
Okay. Are you sure you're comfortable teaching over there? Yeah. Or you need your notes? Can you give me my water? Do you think our shell works?
Yes. Here's your water.
No, it's the bottle.
What's this? Right here.
If people were just joining, they're going to need more time.
Janet, I've put you in another room if you want to go.
Soldiers lined up in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Somebody wrote this is deeply disturbing. And then there are these guys. I don't know where they are. And they'll only say they're from the Department of Justice, which actually doesn't have any kind of armed force associated with it. So, like, who are these guys? Refusal to say. They're not wearing any badges. They're probably, what's his name? Black? Somebody took a picture of a huge, like block-long vehicle and said, "This is exactly what I drove in Afghanistan." And there's a place in LA that has become kind of like an army depot. I mean, stuff is happening. There's marches in Brooklyn right now. But it doesn't usually work out well. saying, has any country on earth tried harder to right the racial wrongs as this country has? If it has, I'd like to know which it is, because I don't know if that's the case. Seven, this is Rachel. Should I not be doing this right
No,
now?
no, dear, please.
Okay.
Hey, Harvey, just a heads up, I still have 3 minutes on the timer.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you for keeping track. I don't know if she can hear us, actually. Woohoo. One seconds, dear.
You gonna close on time?
Close to.
I don't really need to put this on.
Do people?
We still have quite a few people in their rooms. The rooms
Okay.
will close in 20 seconds.
Okay. Thanks, Emily.
So if you click on that arrow,
Can I put it on my lap?
well, we'll see.
Click on what? Or just the arrow? I know, yeah, I know how to do it.
Do you see how to do it? Arrow right goes to the, okay. Hello, everybody. That's the danger of moving it as you start getting the, well, but if you just do it that way, it's okay there. But I'm not being able to see people. So
What?
I'm not able to see people. I need to be able to see people.
So what should I do? Did I cause that to happen? Oh, oh, I see. Oops. So sorry. Okay. I see.
Can you hit participants and
Here?
Yeah.
Yes.
okay, so we are very curious as to how that was, if anybody has any observations, how that was in your experience. Especially what was it like, what was the difference between naming and just sensing? Who's there?
Charlie? Charlie?
Actually, why don't you use the other one? I'll be able to see it.
Use this one.
Yeah,
But you said I
just-
can't move it.
don't move it, but click on it,
Oh.
participants. Yes, Charlie.
I noticed that once I started describing the sensation, I didn't, the sensation kind of distanced. It was it declined. I wasn't aware of it as much.
So one thing you noticed was that describing led to a dissipation of the particular experience.
Right.
Did you have any reaction to that? Did that affect you one way or the other, that it was dissipating?
Well, as I was trying to describe it to my partner, then I would have to stop talking for a minute to go back and feel it, to remember what some of the sensations were.
Yeah, and
I didn't have any strong feeling. I'm not sure what you're asking.
I'm just wondering if it impacted you in one way or the other.
It reminded me of a time, let's see, that would be 45 years ago, in a relationship with someone who wanted to talk about feelings. And I told them that you can't talk about your feelings. You can either feel or you can talk, but you can't do them both at the same time.
Okay,
And that didn't do much for our communication.
right. So that's something that people may feel, or it may be a position. It's a kind of interesting, in a way, issue. You know, is that going to be universally the case or sometimes the case? That's good. That opens up a kind of interesting position. Thank you. Anybody else
Thank you.
have any responses to the exercise, how it affected you, or did you notice anything that you wanted to share? Greg?
Claire. Okay.
Greg?
Go to Greg, then we'll go to Claire.
Well, there it goes. I sort of had the opposite. When I was just trying to focus on the feeling, I would be distracted by other feelings, you know, that I was focusing on my feeling in my lower back, but then when I'm trying to focus on just it in silence, I was distracted by, well, how's it different than over here? And Then
Mhm.
I'd focus on there, and then there'd be a sound, and I'd focus on that. When I
Okay.
was describing it, it was, I was able to focus on the feeling better.
Yeah. So I appreciate what you're saying, and it brings to the fore that we are all ends of one in a kind of, psychological experiment language. We're all idiosyncratic, and every event is idiosyncratic. So it's really wonderful just to hear this different experience that you had. I appreciate your sharing that with us. Thank you. Claire apparently wishes to share.
I saw your hand move, Claire. I don't actually see a hand in the thing. And then Andy and Simon also after Claire.
Claire, are you? wanting to
Yes,
share? Yeah, there
I'm
you are.
unmuted. In the heat of the moment, I forgot to raise my hand via the participants box.
Okay.
So I just had two reflections, and I had them partly because no one else was raising their hand. So the first thing I wanted to share was that, and I kind of just realized it after the exercise finished, but like having a partner that I was going to check in with, like really, it helped me focus more on my like physical sensations. And yeah, I found myself a lot less like distracted during that first part than I was during the meditation. And the other thing that I kind of noticed, not as much during the exercise as like during that final section of like trying to say how the two parts were different. What I noticed was that there was sort of like, as I was trying to label something, there would be this process of like the experience itself often kind of felt like it was, like if my attention was inside my body, it was like the experience was kind of taking up all the space in my body. And then trying to come up with a word sort of felt like, there was a process of feeling into that experience more deeply. And then the whole thing would kind of collapse down to one little word or one little label. And I found it interesting that, that it wasn't just experience label, but there was sort of like a reaching out first as I tried to label it. So I got actually more specific and then less specific once there was a label. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but
No,
I
it
just
does. But I mean, you're describing a very rich process of noticing how your attention kind of went out and then it went more narrow. And it's wonderful that you can see how your attention has different qualities to it. It's a very, very rich and subtle set of discriminations.
If I may, I was curious, Claire, I noticed the way your hands moved. It almost seemed like, and I think you even said it came together almost like it, I don't know, like in a center of some kind or is that the case?
it was sort of like
Like
shifting between
congealing?
modes of knowing.
Yeah.
Like there's that sort of nonverbal, just experiential mode, and then there's trying to reduce something kind of beyond words down to something like compact enough to communicate between people.
Claire, did you notice anything in your body when that word did get landed on?
Well, now that you ask, the thing that's noticeable is that I was not noticing what was happening in my body anymore. I was then like, I've produced a word, like my task was over. And that like more intensive attention to sensation was it just kind of disappeared once I like had accomplished my task.
So there was something that disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you've ever read any kind of focusing or if you ever got puzzled by, there's a phrase in focusing, it's called a felt sense and a shift of the felt sense.
Mm-hmm.
And actually that disappearance would be a kind of shift in the felt sense. So let me ask you, did you ever read any focusing?
No, actually, what was more in my mind was frames, the frames meditations that we would do,
okay.
and the collapse of the frame.
Yeah, okay. Well, you might enjoy reading about it and you might then be puzzled, but then you may have a handle even in this one experience. That's good. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for the experience. It was really rich.
Andy and Simon.
We're unmuted. We're unmuted.
No, you're good.
There you
We
are.
hear you.
So I was, this is Andy. I was interested, or it was interesting that as, and maybe it was because of the nature of the exercise, but as the sensing, as I was sensing and not talking, I was actually verbalizing in my head what I was actually going to say to describe it. So by the time I got to the describing, I'd already accomplished both parts of the exercise.
Right. And I guess I would ask, the difference being in one, you were talking within the space of your mind, and
Yes.
the other, you were talking with Simon live. And did you notice a difference?
I described it better to Simon than I was describing it to myself, but the concepts were the same.
Yeah, but there was some sense that there was a shift in some subtle quality in doing it with the real person.
Yes.
Yeah, great. And that's part of this, is just to notice really subtle differences in our experience, and just to be curious about that we have these discriminatory capacities that we often don't call into question.
Can
to-
I ask one thing
Yeah.
about that? Andy, you said that it was better, your description or something was better when you were sharing the word with Simon.
Mhm.
And is it possible to say what was better? You said the concept was the same, but something was better. What was better?
The actual words coming out of my mouth rather than being in my head, they formed the idea better.
I see. So the verbalization itself clarified in a way?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. That's pretty interesting, actually. Same word, in the head, out of the mouth, different. Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Paul Easton.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I thought it was completely worthless. I mean, that in itself is interesting, I suppose. I couldn't see what point it could conceivably be. My partner did say that when she spoke about, when she described the sensation,
You're supposed to talk about
not
Are you
less.
talking about yourself, Paul? Or are you talking about
You should talk about yourself,
The
Paul, not your
exercise. I
partner.
thought the exercise was completely worthless.
Okay.
you felt the exercise was worthless?
Yeah, I could not conceive of what relevance, what it can conceivably show of any interest.
Okay, I appreciate
And
that.
I still can't.
Okay,
But
thank
from
you.
a meta-analysis, it might be sort of interesting in showing that, you know, maybe I can't, maybe it's that my lack of the ability to relate it to some larger conceptual framework prevents me. But I really, I really can't see why it should have any effect. Didn't have any effect on me.
Okay, thank you.
In
Thank
general,
you.
I can't see why. Yeah, okay, so it might have an effect, but I can't understand.
All right,
Okay.
thank you. I appreciate your sharing. On to Ken.
So the context of the dyad, I'm noticing now as I reflect on the experience more, it created more space for the experience to be held and for language to find a connection. And as we talked, I noticed that there was a kind of thinking mind wanting to kind of find a word, kind of get it nailed down, complete the exercise. But then as I went on further and as we went back and forth, I noticed that the experience began to point toward language itself, much more spacious than it was something that needed to just be nailed down or wrapped up or kind of.
Great. Yeah, and so I just encourage you to continue to be curious about how words, spacious language is one way to say it, and or nailed down language. Words may have all sorts of valences that I think it's wonderful to be able to be aware of. Thank you. Thank you. And we'll take Dahlia, and then I want to hear from Dan. So Dahlia?
The difference for me was not, I don't know if I'm answering the question about the language, but my experience was completely different. Just the set of sensations that I was experiencing between just being within myself and communicating with my partner, I had a completely different set of feelings, of sensations that I was experiencing, and they changed pretty rapidly as I was communicating them. So the dyad brought upon a very rich experience itself. There was excitement, there was a little bit of fear, there was embarrassment, and there was like a whole slew of emotions that moved through in those 2 minutes of actually communicating with each other. And so the focus that I had was more on those changing sensations. I did express them verbally, but I don't know if I can say much about the use of the words, but just about the rapid succession of emotions that move through just by being connected to another person.
Right. So one of the things you're speaking to so eloquently is the dynamism of experience, and how many of us, because of invariant representation, think that our experience is relatively static, our bodies, our emotions, our thoughts, but actually it's quite dynamic. And sometimes when we touch into it, that dynamism becomes very, very evident. So I thank you so much, Dahlia. And I would like to bring Dent into the fold and allow you to say whatever you would like by way of responding to what I said this evening.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm Dent. I know many of you, but some of you I don't. So good to see you. Whether I know you or not, good to see you.
My computer on the top.
No, I don't want to.
Okay.
Yeah, just in listening to Harvey, one question that sort of emerged for me is, how do we honor emotions and allow them to guide us, or allow them to teach us or to learn from them, while at the same time not being hijacked or sabotaged by them?
Yeah, so I think that's in a way both the $64,000 question, but I think that I think that many of us, and I would include myself, have a kind of distrust of our emotional processes. And my basic guideline for, let's take anger. So if I'm angry and my inclination is to lash out or hit or shame or blame, those are acting out parts of the energy of anger that are not functional. But there is an element of anger that has to do with boundary setting or justice or setting a limit or setting what's wrong right, that is very, very profound. And I think in letting the energy sit with us, there may naturally emerge a kind of clarity, or it's going to be a lot clearer than if we try to think it through, than if we feel it through. And so I don't think there's necessarily a step process. It's more a marination process, and using basic guidelines of good behavior so that the acting out or acting in inclinations to sort of either over emote or under emote are somehow addressed, but we actually allow ourselves to sit with the experience of the emotion. What do you think of that, Dent?
I think that sounds wonderful, and on a personal level, challenging.
No doubt, no doubt. Yeah.
When I look at my own sort of experience with emotions right now, I'm just really fascinated by emotions, and at the same time, yeah, I'm fascinated. And when I look back at my own experience with emotions, I meditated. I don't want, I meditated for many years, and I went to get training in this program called Mindfulness based emotional balance. And I was just kind of like, all right, I'm going to get trained to teach this. And I was just overwhelmed with the lack of emotional awareness that I had. And looking back on my life, I see like this part of me that's just has no clue about what an emotion is at all. And they're very scary. But there's this other part of me that's really, obviously, it's what gives a meaning to my life. And my own Buddhist practice, to some extent, has been, all right, how do I not feel emotions? I mean, looking back on it. And so for me, it's just a wonderful place to explore.
But isn't there a kind of, I mean, I get everything you're saying and can relate quite personally with everything you're saying, but isn't there a historical date stamp that you could put on some of the statements, that so when you say, I'm unaware of emotions, is that not more something that applied in the past, and where emotions were out of control? Isn't that more in the past? And isn't, when you say, and emotions really give so much meaning and richness to my life, is that not more the case currently?
Yeah, I would say my particular place I'm at currently is.
So that,
Wait, he didn't finish.
what?
I don't think he finished.
You have something more to say?
Yeah, the word that I really use in terms of my own perspective on emotions is emotional literacy. I'm trying to train myself to be more emotionally literate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm using literate. I think of literacy like as a book. It's not necessarily a word, but literacy is just understanding the words and how they flow together and the meaning. And so I think of emotional, some people use emotional regulation or emotional balance. For me, that word literacy has a personal resonance with me, in the sense that learning to be with my emotions is learning to understand what they are and not run from them or not be subsumed by them in sort of a reactive way. And so for me, literacy is, it's like we did in this exercise, just coming back home again and again, or trying to come back home again and again to what it is I'm feeling, experiencing.
And how does it, I mean, you don't have to go here, but I'm being a little personal.
Yeah.
How does it affect you when you succeed in neither too much nor too little? How does that affect you?
It gives me a lot more choice in my life.
How does it feel, aside from the
feels,
choice?
it feels, for instance, when I'm able to, not necessarily in meditation, but in real life, I have this exercise, this 1 minute exercise. I just stop, pause, and ask myself, what am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
And what triggers that is typically I'm aware that, all right, there's some sort of thought. You use the word invariant representation. There's some sort of thought process I'm involved in that's like either criticizing myself or making a judgment. And I was like, all right, Dan, stop. What am I feeling? Drop the story. And then everything kind of loosens up, and I'm aware of a feeling rather than a story that's sort of guiding me. And it feels spacious. Even if the feeling is very uncomfortable and something I don't want to feel, it gives a little space to it and room for action, conscious action.
I will take this as an unintended advertisement for what I taught tonight.
Okay.
No, I think it's beautiful what you're describing, and it's exactly the process that I'm trying to describe. And I mean, I think you and I know that, I hope, that we're both saying that, most of us have learned not to be able to be with our emotions. And I guess I would add, for me, the process you just described often has a kind of flavor of something sacred about it. It's a very sacred space. You talked about space. It's a kind of sacred space to allow myself to be who I am It's very, very precious. Can I get Dent on my screen? I can't see him.
Sorry. Well, he's not on your screen. I don't know why.
You can.
I'm on my screen.
Yes,
There you are.
Okay, there you are. I don't know.
Anything by way of a response to, it's that screen that you have to be flipping
Oh, I
to
see. Okay.
find him.
I have to find him here. I see.
Yeah.
Something else that really stood out from what you were talking about, Harvey, is this thing that this idea that emotions are propelling us to act in us.
Yeah.
And that's to me can be very liberating. And oh, there's this thing going on, this emotion. What is it wanting me to do right now? Or what is it? And just realizing that gives me more choice. For instance, these sort of subtle types of anger that just may be under the surface that I'm not really aware of, because I think of anger as this big outburst, but they're telling me to do something, to get rid of somebody or to make a judgment about somebody or something. So for me, that little piece of the intention to act associated with the emotion is very helpful.
It's enormous. One of the things I notice about historically myself and certainly people I work with is that one of the reasons people don't want to allow emotions is because they feel that the impulse to act is not arguable with if you have the emotion. So if I'm having the emotion to hit you, I have to hit you. And the only way not to hit you is not to have anger. The fact that I can have the impulse to hit you and not hit you because I can sense the anger but not act it is revelatory to adults. I mean, for children, it's clear they may not be able to make that distinction. And in a way, it's the difference between an adult and a child. And for children, it may be very, very important to hear, you can't hit, you can't hit, you can't hit. But many of us learned, not only can I hit, I can't have anger, because when I have anger, I hit. And being able to start to distinguish the impulse part of the emotion from the feeling of the emotion, the experience of the emotion, is a critical piece of, I think, emotional spiritual work with working with emotions. Then do you want to have anything to say by way of the final something on that?
I'm kind of out of words right now.
Okay, it's lovely. For all here, Dent is going to be presenting the next time we meet. And he is the proud author of a new book, that The Power of Purpose, which we will hear more about, I hope. And it's a wonderful book. And so thank you, Den, for your response.
Thank you.
Are at the end of our meeting, and what we do typically, we have a book and we have sort of names, but we were anticipating a lot of people. So we're going to do our blessing. We're going to light our candle. I will just make some generic statements about who we're holding in mind tonight as a consequence of our being together. We're sharing the goodness of our work together. We're going to encourage everybody.
Yeah.
Encourage everybody on your own to say the name of people, groups, people who've passed, people who are ill, people who you wish benefit to. So we are just sharing our beneficence with others. But we do that we have a blessing on our prayer sheet. And I don't know if, Emily, can you get that blessing up or not so?
I'm getting it up there.
Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry, I should have warned you. Oh, it's there, it looks like. Okay, so. With all of you in mind, we light this lamp of clarity. May the glow of love, wisdom shine within us, everyone, till we all rise forth born in one enlightened mandala. And tonight, along with all beings, we bring to mind all who've been victims of racial injustice, and police violence, and painful behavior, harmful behavior, as well as those who are the perpetrators of such acts. May they all come to peace internally, and clarity and compassion. Also, we bring to mind all who have been ill, all who are recovering, all who have passed, all those who are related to those who have passed. May they be at ease. May all be peaceful. Those who have passed, may they be liberated. And for all of those who are in difficulty, may they be free of difficulty. Those who are ill, may they be free of illness. Those who have passed, may they all be liberated and in full Buddhahood. And you can bring to mind those who you wish to bring to mind. And we conclude with an ah for all beings, wishing welfare and peace, wisdom, liberation, kindness, health, absence of torment to all beings. Yeah, we have a few announcements.
Do you have them? Is that the sheet over there? First of all, we're glad that you're with us tonight. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Continuation of this course with Jen. For those of you who are interested, let's see. Well, Friday, June 5th is a full moon of Sagadawa, which is a high point of the Buddhist traditional calendar commemorating Buddha's birth, parinirvana, and enlightenment. At 7 p.m., we recite a prayer. It's called the Prayer for Extreme Times, and have some brief reflections. At 7:45, for those of you interested, we will have a green Tara practice, and the text for that is available on our website. June 7th, Sunday, we have our first Sunday talk at 10:30. It's a half-hour short talk about, actually 25-minute talk on a relevant Buddhist topic, and a guided meditation between 11 and 12. And every Sunday, just so you know, there is a guided meditation by various senior students of Dawn Mountain from 11 to 12 every Sunday. We will be here next Sunday.
Emily, can you save the chat from this class?
I can try.
Well, if you
I
can
can save it on
can
your
you forward
computer,
it?
maybe.
If you just forward it to me in an email, if you can.
Here, I could save it on your computer. Would you like that? I just
Yeah.
did it.
You saved it?
Yes, I learned how to do it recently.
Okay.
But you do it too, Emily, just in case.
All right. Well, great to see everyone. If you want to unmute yourselves and say hello and goodbye and good night. Great to see everyone. And thank you so much.